The heat in Red Hollow didn't just sit on your skin, it crawled inside and made itself at home. July 1882 brought temperatures that turned the main street into a shimmer of dust and regret, where even the dogs knew better than to bark after noon. The wooden sidewalks creaked under boot heels, a sound the townspeople had learned to read like a language. Fast steps meant someone was running an errand. Slow, deliberate steps meant trouble was thinking. The Rourke brothers had taught them to listen. Caleb was the eldest at 34, built like a man who'd never backed down because he'd never had to. He wore his authority the way other men wore Sunday clothes. Visible, intentional, meant to be noticed. His hands were scarred from years of making examples, and his eyes carried the cold arithmetic of someone who'd calculated the exact amount of violence needed to keep a town obedient. Not too much. That brought federal attention. Not too little. That invited resistance. He'd found the perfect balance. Silas, 2 years younger, was the brain behind the brutality. He kept ledgers, tracked debts, and remembered every slight with the precision of a banker counting interest. Where Caleb broke bones, Silas broke spirits. He knew which families were one bad harvest from starvation, which merchants were skimming just enough to survive, which men would look away if the price was their daughter's safety. He didn't need to shout. The numbers did his threatening for him. Then there was Jesse, barely 23, all raw nerve and wounded pride. He was fast with a gun, genuinely fast, not frontier town fast, where reputation covered for mediocrity. He'd killed 4 men in fair fights, and 2 in fights that became fair after Silas finished rewriting the witnesses' memories. Jesse wore his guns low and his anger high, a combination that made even his brothers careful around him on bad days. Together, they'd turned Red Hollow into a monument to their will. The town had learned to breathe around them. Businesses opened when the Rourkes said so. Freight contracts went where they decided. The marshal, Dean Carter, wore his badge like a man wearing a noose. One sudden move and everything would snap. He'd been a real lawman once back in Kansas, where right and wrong still meant something. Red Hollow had taught him differently. Every Monday, Caleb Rourke sat at the same table in the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Not because he needed a drink at 10 in the morning, but because he needed everyone to see him sitting where he wanted, when he wanted. The saloon owner, Marcus Webb, had learned to keep that table empty, the way you'd keep a grave ready for someone who wasn't dead yet, but would be soon enough. It was on a Monday morning, the kind of quiet that felt like held breath, when Ethan Vale rode into town. Nobody noticed him at first. Red Hollow got drifters the way it got dust storms, regular, unwelcome, and gone by morning. He came from the east on a bay gelding that had seen better days, but still carried itself with something close to dignity. The man himself looked ordinary in that dangerous way some men do, where nothing about them quite stands out until you realize that's intentional. Mid-30s, maybe. Average height, average build, wearing clothes that had been worn hard but kept clean. His hat brim was pulled low, not hiding his face so much as suggesting he didn't need you studying it. He had a Colt on his hip, the grip worn smooth from use, and a Winchester in a saddle scabbard that had been oiled recently enough to smell it in the heat. What he didn't have was the look. Every drifter who'd spent more than a day in frontier towns learned to read the currents, to sense which tables belonged to which men, to understand the invisible borders that kept you breathing. Ethan Vale either didn't have that sense or didn't care to use it. He tied his horse outside the Lucky Dollar, walked through the batwing doors, and made his first mistake, or what everyone assumed was a mistake. The saloon went quiet, the way a church goes quiet, when someone says the wrong name at a funeral. Marcus Webb, polishing glasses behind the bar with hands that had developed a permanent tremor over the past 4 years, actually stopped moving. 2 regulars at the far table, Ben Hodges and his brother Sam, froze with cards halfway to the table. Even the piano player, old Carl Winters, who'd been half drunk since 1877, let his fingers rest on the keys mid-song. Ethan Vale walked to the center of the room, scanned the available tables with the casual assessment of a man choosing where to eat breakfast, and sat down at Caleb Rourke's table. Not near it, not across the room from it, at it. He set his hat on the empty chair beside him, leaned back, and caught Marcus's eye with a universal gesture for service. Marcus Webb had served drinks through 3 Indian scares, 2 range wars, and a robbery that left his predecessor bleeding out on these same floorboards. None of those had made his hands shake the way they shook now. "Sir," Marcus said, and his voice came out higher than he meant it to. That's Mr. Rourke's table. I don't see him sitting here, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, matter of fact, the tone of a man ordering eggs. Coffee, whatever's hot. From the corner table, Ben Hodges made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a prayer. His brother Sam was already calculating angles to the door, the kind of math you learned when survival depended on knowing your exits. Marcus looked at the clock. 9:47. Caleb would arrive in 13 minutes, the way he'd arrived every Monday for 4 years, with the punctuality of a man who'd made the world bend to his schedule. Please, Marcus said, and now there was no hiding the fear. I'm asking. There are other tables. Ethan looked at him then, really looked, and Marcus saw something in those eyes that made him step back despite himself. Not anger, not even defiance. Something colder, the gaze of a man who'd already run the numbers and liked his odds. I'll take that coffee now, Ethan said. Marcus brought it, his hands shaking so badly that half the cup sloshed into the saucer. He set it down and retreated behind the bar like a man seeking cover before the shooting started. The next 12 minutes passed with the speed of a crucifixion. Ben Hodges and his brother left first, muttering excuses about morning chores that everyone knew were lies. Carl, the piano player, followed, suddenly remembering an appointment. One by one, the saloon emptied until only Marcus remained, trapped behind his own bar, and Ethan Vale, drinking coffee that had gone cold from neglect. At exactly 10 o'clock, the Batwing doors swung open. Caleb Rourke walked in first, the way he always did, with the confidence of a man entering his own property. Silas followed 3 steps behind, already scanning the room with those accountant's eyes that missed nothing. Jesse came last, his hand resting casual-like on his gun belt, a habit he'd developed after the third man who'd thought he could outdraw him. Caleb saw Ethan immediately. Of course he did. A wolf knows when something's in his territory. He stopped walking. Silas stopped behind him. Jesse's hand moved from casual to ready, a shift so subtle most men would miss it. The silence in the saloon felt like physics, something with actual weight and pressure. "You're in my seat," Caleb said. His voice was calm, conversational even, the way it always was before the violence started. Ethan looked up from his coffee cup, made eye contact, and did something nobody in Red Hollow had done in 4 years. He smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic smile, the kind of smile a man gives when he's exactly where he means to be. "Your name on it?" Ethan asked. Behind the bar, Marcus Webb made a sound like air escaping from a punctured lung. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room, a tightening, like a rope being pulled taut before it snaps. "Don't need my name on it," Caleb said, taking a step forward. "Everybody knows." "I'm not from everybody," Ethan replied. He took another sip of his cold coffee, unhurried. "Just passing through." "Then keep passing," Jesse said from the doorway, his voice tight with the eagerness of a man who'd been waiting for an excuse. "While you still can." Ethan turned his attention to Jesse, studied him with the same unhurried assessment he'd given the room when he walked in. Jesse didn't like that look, didn't like being measured like livestock at auction. "You the fast one?" Ethan asked. Jesse's hand twitched toward his gun. Silas put a hand on his brother's shoulder, gentle but firm. The touch of a man who'd stopped this particular explosion before. "My brother asked you nice," Silas said, and his voice carried the patience of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "You can walk out of here. That's generous, considering." Ethan finished his coffee, set the cup down with deliberate care, and stood. For a moment, everyone in the room thought they knew what would happen next. The stranger would back down, mumble an apology, leave town before sunset. That's how these things went. That's how they always went. Ethan picked up his hat, brushed dust from the brim, and walked toward the door. He passed within 3 feet of Caleb, close enough that most men would have expected violence. Caleb's hand hovered near his gun, ready but not drawn. No need to shoot a man who was already leaving. Ethan reached the doorway, stopped, and turned back. "See you boys around," he said. Then he walked out into the brilliant morning sunshine, leaving 3 furious men and 1 terrified bartender in his wake. Jesse moved first, starting for the door with murder in his eyes, but Caleb's voice stopped him. "Let him go." "The hell?" Jesse spun. "He sat at your table. I know what he did." Caleb's voice was soft, dangerous in its quietness. And everyone saw him leave when I told him to. That's what matters. Silas was watching the door with narrowed eyes. He's not a drifter. No, Caleb agreed. He's not. So what is he? Caleb moved to his table, the one that was empty again, the way it should be, and sat down. Marcus materialized with whiskey without being asked, setting it down with shaking hands. I don't know yet, Caleb said, but find out. Ethan Vale walked his horse down Main Street at a pace that suggested he had nowhere important to be, and all day to not be there. He noted the bank, solid brick construction that spoke of Eastern money and local ambition. The general store, its windows dusty but displaying enough goods to suggest the town wasn't completely dying. The marshal's office, identifiable by the faded star painted on the door, and the man watching from the window inside. He passed the church, white paint peeling in the heat, and a schoolhouse that looked like it hadn't seen students since spring. Further down, he found what he was looking for. A small office with a hand-painted sign reading Hartwell Freight. A woman stood outside, checking the wheels on a freight wagon with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She was maybe 30, wearing practical clothes that had been mended more than once, her dark hair pulled back in a way that said she didn't have time for vanity. Her hands were calloused, her face sun-weathered, and when she looked up at Ethan's approach, her eyes carried the wariness of someone who'd learned to expect the worst and was rarely disappointed. "Help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she doubted it. "Looking for freight service," Ethan said, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. "Heading west in a few days. Need to send some things ahead." "Can't help you." She went back to checking the wagon wheel, dismissing him. "Sign says freight service." "Sign's old." Ethan dismounted, tied his horse, and walked closer. "You Hartwell?" She straightened and he saw her hand move subtly toward a rifle leaning against the office wall. "Lena Hartwell. And like I said, I can't help you. Try the next town." "Why?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You new here?" "Got in about an hour ago." "Then let me educate you quick, so you can leave before you get educated permanent." She jerked her chin toward the center of town. "The Rourke brothers run freight in Red Hollow, all freight. Mine's not welcome on their roads, which means it's not welcome, period. So unless you want your goods sitting in my yard until they rot, you'll take your business elsewhere." Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her with that same unhurried assessment he'd given everything else in this town. "They try to buy you out?" 3 times. "You said no." "I don't take orders from bullies." Her jaw set in a way that suggested this was a conversation she'd had before and didn't enjoy repeating. "My father built this business. I'm not selling it because 3 thugs with guns decided they want it." "Your father's still around?" Something flickered across her face. Old grief, worn smooth by time but still there. "Died 2 years ago. Heart gave out." She paused. "Or got broken. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." The rifle was fully in her hands now, not pointed at him but available. Ethan noticed and approved. A woman alone in a town like this needed to be ready. "What's your name, mister?" "Ethan Vale." "Well, Mr. Vale, I appreciate the business, but I'm not taking on new contracts. The Rourkes have made it clear that anyone who uses my service will regret it, and I'm not about to put targets on paying customers." "Decent of you." "Decent's got nothing to do with it, just practical." She softened slightly, seeing something in him that made her add, "There's a freight office 2 towns over. They're not cheap, but they'll get your goods where they need to go." Ethan nodded, seemed to accept this, and turned to leave. Then, as if it was an afterthought, "You ever fight back?" Lena's expression hardened. "You mean, have I shot at men who show up in the middle of the night to smash my wagons? Set fire to my barn? Run off my horses?" She paused. "No. Because the marshal won't do anything, the town won't back me, and fighting 3 armed men with a rifle and spite only works in dime novels. Sometimes it works in real life too." "You speak from experience?" "Some." She studied him now, really looked at him for the first time, saw the worn gun, the careful eyes, the way he stood like a man used to being ready for things to go wrong. "You a gunfighter?" "I'm a man who's had to fight," Ethan said. "Not the same thing. Close enough to get you killed in a town like this." Her voice softened, just a fraction. "Mr. Vale, I don't know what brought you to Red Hollow, But my advice is to finish whatever business you have and leave before the Rourkes decide you're more than just a curious stranger. That table you sat at this morning? Men have died for less. How do you know about that? This is a small town. News travels faster than good sense. She shouldered her rifle properly now, a clear signal the conversation was over. Be safe, Mr. Vale. He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode away. Lena watched him go, then went back to her wagon wheel, but her hands were shaking now, and it took her 3 tries to tighten the bolt she'd been working on. Something about that stranger felt like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air gets heavy and your skin prickles and, you just know that everything's about to change. Marshal Dean Carter watched from his office window as Ethan Vale rode past. He'd been watching since the stranger tied his horse outside the Lucky Dollar, watching when he walked out alive, watching as he talked to Lena Hartwell like Red Hollow was a normal town where normal conversations happened. Dean was 43, looked 50, and felt 100. The badge on his chest weighed more every year, until some days he considered just setting it on his desk and walking away. Other days, most days, he reminded himself that a corrupt marshal was better than no marshal at all. At least that's what he told himself when he couldn't sleep. He'd been a real lawman once. Kansas, before the railroad changed everything and the violence got organized. He'd put bad men in jail and slept fine afterward. Then his wife died from cholera, and his daughter said she couldn't look at him the same after he shot a 16-year-old kid who'd pulled a gun in a bar fight, and suddenly Kansas didn't feel like home anymore. Red Hollow had seemed like a second chance, a frontier town that needed experience and wasn't asking too many questions about why a marshal would leave a good position. He'd arrived in 1878, full of plans and principles. The Rourkes had arrived in 1879, full of guns and ambition. Dean learned quickly that principle was a luxury for men with backup. He had none. The town council wouldn't stand against the Rourkes because half of them were on the Rourkes' payroll, and the other half were too scared to admit they weren't. The citizens wouldn't support him because supporting a losing fight was just suicide with extra steps. So Dean made compromises. Small ones at first, looking away when Jesse Rourke got drunk and shot up the sky. Then bigger ones, not investigating when a freight wagon accidentally caught fire. Then the kind that kept him up at night, ruling a man's death accidental when everyone knew Jesse had provoked the fight. Each compromise made the next one easier, and the next, until one day Dean looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back. Now this stranger had walked into town and done what Dean hadn't managed in 4 years. He'd challenged the Rourkes and walked away. The office door opened without knocking. Dean didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Marshal. Silas Rourke had a way of making a title sound like an insult. He walked in, closed the door, and stood there with the patience of a man used to being listened to. Mr. Rourke. Dean kept his voice neutral, professional. The tone of a man doing his job. The stranger who came in this morning, Ethan Vale, what do you know about him? Nothing yet, he just arrived. Find out. It wasn't a request. They both knew it. I'll ask around, Dean said, but if he's just passing through, men who are just passing through don't order 3 coffins from the undertaker. Dean felt something cold settle in his stomach. He what? Went to Buchanan's place about 20 minutes ago, ordered 3 pine coffins, paid cash up front. Silas's eyes were flat, calculating. Said he'd need them soon. Maybe he's got people dying somewhere. 3 coffins, Marshal, same number as my brothers and me. Silas let that sit there, heavy and obvious. That strike you as coincidence? Dean wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that sometimes things were just random, meaningless. But he'd been a lawman too long to believe in coincidence when it came wrapped in that much intention. I'll talk to him, Dean said. Find out what his business is here. Do more than talk. I want to know where he's from, why he's here, and whether he's working alone. Silas moved toward the door, then stopped. And Marshal? My brother Caleb is patient, but Jesse isn't. Whatever this Vale is planning, it'd be better for everyone if it stopped before it started. He left without waiting for a response. Dean sat down at his desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and looked at the bottle there. He'd managed to not open it before noon for 3 weeks now, a personal record. He stared at it for a long moment, then slowly closed the drawer. Some days required staying sober, even when you desperately didn't want to be. Jacob Buchanan had been building coffins in Red Hollow for 12 years. He'd buried children and old-timers, drifters and founding families, good people and bad. He built each box with the same care, because death didn't care about your character, and neither should a decent carpenter. But the order from Ethan Vale was different. Not because of the number. 3 wasn't unusual when disease hit a family. Not because of the hurry. People died on their own schedule. Not yours. It was the certainty. Pine, Ethan had said, laying cash on the workbench. Nothing fancy, standard depth, and I'll need them by Friday. Someone sick? Jacob had asked, the way you do when taking an order like this. Not yet. Those 2 words had hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Jacob had built coffins for men the Rourkes killed. He'd measured bodies and calculated dimensions and tried not to think about whether the deceased had children or owed money or deserved what happened. You couldn't do this job if you let yourself care too much. But 3 coffins, ordered in advance for people not yet dead? He'd taken the money because refusing would have raised questions. And questions got you noticed in Red Hollow. Better to be the carpenter who stayed out of things than the carpenter who knew too much. Now it was late afternoon, and Jacob sat in his workshop surrounded by lumber and tools and the smell of fresh-cut pine. 3 coffins in various stages of completion. He'd promised them by Friday, and Jacob Buchanan kept his promises, even the ones that felt like prophecy. By evening, everyone in Red Hollow had heard the story. It multiplied and transformed with each retelling, the way stories do. Some versions had Ethan pulling his gun on Caleb, others had him insulting Jesse's mother. A few had him laughing in Silas's face. The truth was less dramatic, but somehow more disturbing. A stranger had done nothing more than sit at a table and refuse to move, and somehow that was more threatening than actual violence. In the Lucky Dollar, now properly crowded with evening drinkers, Ben Hodges was holding court with his version of events. "I'm telling you, he didn't even flinch," Ben said, gesturing with a whiskey glass that had been refilled more times than was wise. Caleb walks in, all 3 of them ready to shoot him dead, and this Vale character just keeps drinking his coffee like it's Sunday brunch. "That's not bravery, that's stupidity," someone muttered. "Maybe." Ben leaned in, lowering his voice the way people do when sharing secrets they want everyone to hear. "But then he orders 3 coffins." "I heard about that," Sam Hodges added from his brother's side. "Paid cash. Didn't even haggle on price." "Why 3?" a woman asked from the bar. Sarah Mitchell, who ran the boarding house and heard more gossip than the telegraph operator. Everyone went quiet because they all knew the answer, but saying it out loud felt dangerous. Finally, Ben said it. "Same number as the Rourke brothers." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded violence or revelation, sometimes both. "He's going to try to kill them," Sarah breathed. "Suicide," someone said. "Murder," another corrected. Either way, those coffins get used, Ben finished his drink. Just question is whether it's him in 1 or them in 3. "Or all 4, Sarah added quietly. Cool. Ethan Vale spent the evening in the boarding house. Sarah Mitchell ran, a 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left but stood through sheer stubbornness. His room was small, clean enough, with a window that overlooked Main Street. He didn't eat with the other boarders, didn't make conversation, just paid for his room through the week and went upstairs with the same unhurried deliberation he'd shown since arriving. Sarah watched him go, torn between curiosity and self-preservation. The curiosity won. She knocked on his door 20 minutes later, carrying a plate of stew she'd saved from dinner. "Thought you might be hungry," she said when he opened the door. Ethan looked at the plate, then at her, and something like gratitude crossed his face. "Thank you." He took the plate but didn't invite her in. Sarah got the message but couldn't help adding, "Mr. Vale, I don't know what you're planning, but this town, it's not worth dying for." "Every place is worth something," Ethan said quietly. "Question is whether anyone's willing to pay the price. The Rourkes, I know about the Rourkes. Then you know you can't beat them, not alone." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said something that Sarah would think about for years afterward. "I'm not trying to beat them. I'm trying to make it possible for someone else to." He closed the door gently, leaving her standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. That night, in the room above the Lucky Dollar that served as the Rourkes' unofficial headquarters, three brothers sat around a table covered with maps and ledgers. Silas had spent the afternoon gathering information. He reported it now with his usual precision. Ethan Vale came from the east, alone. Paid cash at the boarding house, the undertaker, the livery. No credit, no accounts. Asked no questions about business or freight routes. Talked to Lena Hartwell but didn't arrange any service. So? Jesse was cleaning his gun, the rasp of the cloth on metal a constant rhythm. So he's not a businessman, not a freight agent, not a prospector. What then? Silas looked at his eldest brother. What do you think? Caleb had been quiet, which was never a good sign. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and certain. He's bait. Bait for what? For us. Caleb stood, moved to the window, looked out at the dark street below. Someone wants to see what we'll do. Federal marshal, maybe? Or a railroad company testing whether we're worth buying or eliminating? Then we should kill him now, Jesse said. Before whatever he's planning. No! Caleb's voice cut through his brother's eagerness like a knife. If he is bait, killing him brings whatever's behind him down on us. If he's not, he paused. Then we deal with him publicly, make an example, show everyone what happens to men who challenge us. When? Silas asked. Soon, but not yet. Caleb turned from the window. Let him think he's in control. Let him make his move. Then we end it on our terms. Jesse smiled, the expression of a man who'd been waiting for permission. And the coffins? He'll use them, Caleb said. Just not the way he planned. The three brothers sat in silence after that, each contemplating their own version of what was coming. None of them slept well that night. Neither did Ethan Vale, lying in his boarding house room, staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until everything would change. Neither did Marshal Dean Carter, sitting at his desk with the bottle finally open, trying to remember when he'd stopped being the kind of man who'd walk into danger instead of watch it happen. Neither did Lena Hartwell, who kept her rifle loaded and wondered why a stranger's eyes had looked so much like goodbye. Red Hollow settled into an uneasy silence, the kind that comes before storms or surrenders, and everyone waited to see which it would be. 3 coffins waited in Jacob Buchanan's workshop, empty but ready. Friday was 2 days away. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of heat that made the air visible, wavering above the street like water that wasn't there. Ethan was up before dawn, which meant he was up before everyone except the baker and the prostitutes heading home from the Lucky Dollar. He walked the perimeter of Red Hollow in the gray light, counting steps, noting angles, mapping the town in his head the way a general maps a battlefield. The main street ran east to west, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass if neither driver was drunk or stupid. Buildings lined both sides, most wooden, a few brick. The bank sat solid at the north end, 3 stories of Eastern confidence. The Lucky Dollar occupied the center, its second-floor balcony offering clear sight lines down the street in both directions. Smart placement for men who valued control. Ethan noted the alleys, 3 on the north side, 2 on the south. The water troughs, positioned every 100 feet for fire safety, but useful for cover. The awning posts, thick enough to stop a bullet if you stood behind the right one. The distances between doorways measured in seconds rather than feet, because seconds were what mattered when the shooting started. He was standing outside the general store, apparently studying a display of harness leather, when Marshal Carter found him. Mr. Vale. Ethan turned, his hand nowhere near his gun but ready to be if needed. Carter noticed and filed that information away with all the other things he'd noticed about this stranger. Marshal? Mind if we talk? About? About why you're really here, Carter gestured down the street. Walk with me. They moved together at the slow pace of men who had nowhere urgent to be but were heading there anyway. Carter led them past the closed businesses, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrub grass and the promise of emptiness beyond. You're making people nervous, Carter said. Didn't realize sitting at a table was cause for alarm. It is when it's the wrong table. Carter stopped, turned to face him. Look, I don't know what your business is in Red Hollow, and maybe I don't want to know. But those coffins you ordered, man's entitled to prepare for the future. 3 of them? Ethan met his gaze without flinching, without the performance of innocence that guilty men usually offered. Seemed like the right number. Carter wanted to grab him, Shake him, make him understand what he was walking into. Instead, he said, "The Rourke brothers have killed 8 men in the 4 years they've been here. 2 in fair fights, if you believe the witnesses. 6 in situations that became accidents after the fact. You understand what I'm telling you? I understand you've got a badge and haven't used it." The words hit like a slap. Carter's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like the man he'd been in Kansas, the one who would have arrested the Rourkes on day 1 and damn the consequences. "You don't know anything about this town," Carter said, his voice low and dangerous in a way it hadn't been in years. "I know enough. I know you've got a woman running a freight business who's about to lose everything because 3 bullies decided they want what she has. I know you've got merchants paying protection money and calling it business tax. I know children cross the street when they see Jesse Rourke coming because they've learned what happens when you don't move fast enough. And you think you can fix that? You?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking past Carter to the town beyond. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been sadness or might have been certainty. "I think someone has to try. That's how men die. That's how men live worth remembering." Ethan started walking back toward town. "You want to help, Marshall? Be ready when I call for you." "Call for me to do what?" "Your job." Carter watched him go, torn between admiration and fury. The stranger was either the bravest man he'd met or the stupidest, and Dean had lived long enough to know those 2 things often looked identical until the shooting stopped. He stood there in the morning heat, feeling the weight of his badge like an anchor, and tried to remember the last time someone had told him to do his job. Tried to remember the last time he'd wanted to. The memory wouldn't come. He walked back to his office and sat at his desk and pulled out the bottle again. This time, he didn't stop himself from opening it. Some days required being drunk, even when you desperately wanted to stay sober. Ethan spent the rest of the morning in places where men gathered and talked. The livery stable, where the smell of horses and hay created a confessional atmosphere. The general store, where gossip flowed between purchases. The barber shop, where Charlie Kern had been cutting hair and collecting secrets for 20 years. He didn't ask direct questions. Didn't need to. Men talked when they thought you weren't listening too close, especially men who'd spent years swallowing words they wanted to say. At the livery, he learned that the Rourkes kept 4 additional men on payroll, enforcers who handled the work the brothers considered beneath them. Breaking legs, burning buildings, delivering threats. Their names came up in the careful way people mentioned cancer or poverty, as facts of life you couldn't change but could try to avoid. At the general store, he overheard 2 women discussing Lena Hartwell in voices that mixed sympathy with judgment. "She should just sell and move on," one said. "Stubbornness isn't worth dying for." The other had replied, "Sometimes stubbornness is all you've got left." At the barber shop, Charlie Kern worked his scissors and his information simultaneously. "You really sit at Caleb's table?" he asked, not looking at Ethan in the mirror. "I sat at an empty table. Same thing in this town." Charlie paused his cutting. "You know they're going to come for you." "I'm counting on it." Charlie's hand stopped moving entirely. He looked at Ethan's reflection, really looked, and saw something that made him set down his scissors and step back. "What are you?" "Tired," Ethan said. "Same as everyone else here." "No." Charlie shook his head. "Men who are just tired don't order coffins and wait around for the killing to start. Men who are just tired run. You're something else." Ethan stood from the chair, his haircut half finished. He laid coins on the counter, more than the cost. "I'm someone who stops running." He left the barber shop and walked to Lena Hartwell's freight office, where he found her loading a wagon by herself. The work was hard, the kind that turned muscle into rope and hands into leather. She moved with the efficiency of practice, lifting crates that would have made most men grunt. She saw him coming and didn't stop working. "Told you I wasn't taking business." "I'm not here for business." Ethan picked up one of the crates, felt its weight, and loaded it onto the wagon with the practiced ease of a man who'd done manual labor. "Here to help." "Don't need help." "Everyone needs help. Some people are just too stubborn to admit it." He reached for another crate. Lena grabbed his arm, stopped him. Her grip was strong, her eyes harder. "What are you doing?" "Loading your wagon." "Why?" "Because you're doing it alone when you shouldn't have to be." She released his arm but didn't move away. The last man who helped me load wagons was my father. Week later, Jesse Rourke provoked him into a fight my father couldn't win. Told everyone afterward it was self-defense. Her voice went flat. Witnesses agreed. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. She turned back to the wagon. And help just gets people killed. So take your good intentions somewhere else. Ethan didn't move. What if I told you the Rourke's days are numbered? I'd say you're either crazy or selling something. Neither. Just making a promise. Lena laughed, but it came out bitter. You know how many men have made me promises about the Rourkes? 6. 3 of them left town. 2 paid protection money like everyone else. One's buried in the cemetery with a headstone that says, "Beloved husband," and doesn't mention how he died. She faced him fully now. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in promises from strangers. That's fair. Ethan picked up another crate, loaded it despite her protest. But by Friday, you'll either have 3 new customers or 1 empty town. Either way, things change. The Coffins. It wasn't a question. The Coffins. You're going to fight them, all 3, plus their men. I'm going to end it. Lena stared at him like he'd grown a second head. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's also the only thing nobody's tried yet. He loaded the last crate. Everyone in this town has adapted, bent their lives around the Rourkes like water flowing around rocks. What nobody's done is move the rocks. You can't move them. They're too big, too mean, too many. So everyone keeps saying. Ethan wiped his hands on his pants. But 3 coffins is my bet. I'm usually right about the number. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing by her wagon with her mouth open and her certainty shaken. That afternoon, the Rourkes made their move. Ethan was in his boarding house room when he heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of horses, that particular quality of noise that meant trouble had arrived and wasn't planning to leave quietly. He moved to the window and saw what he'd been expecting since Monday morning. 7 men on horseback filled the street outside Sarah Mitchell's boarding house. The Rourke brothers sat their horses in front, flanked by 4 hired guns whose names Ethan had learned that morning. Frank Dooley, built like a barrel and twice as explosive. Tom Weaver, thin and quiet and responsible for at least 2 of those accidents Marshall Carter mentioned. Billy Preston, barely 20 but eager to prove himself. And Marcus Shaw, older than the others, professional in the way men who kill for money learn to be professional. Caleb Rourke's voice carried up to the window. Ethan Vale, come on out, time we had a conversation. People were clearing the street with the practiced speed of civilians who'd learned to recognize incoming fire. Doors closed, shutters latched. In less than a minute, Main Street was empty except for 7 armed men and the promise of violence. Ethan checked his Colt, made sure the cylinder turned smooth, and went downstairs. Sarah Mitchell stood in the entrance hall, her face pale. Don't go out there. Have to. They'll kill you. Maybe. Ethan put his hand on the door handle. But not today. He stepped outside into the afternoon heat and the weight of 7 pairs of eyes. Caleb sat his horse like a man posing for a statue, upright, confident, already victorious in his own mind. Mr. Vale, glad you could join us. Didn't have much choice, seems like. You always have choices. That's what separates men from animals. Caleb gestured to the street around them. See how empty it is? That's respect. People see us coming. They make room. That's how a civilized town works. That's not respect, Ethan said. That's fear, not the same thing. Jesse leaned forward in his saddle, his hand resting on his gun. You got a smart mouth for someone outnumbered 7-1. 7-1 assumes you all shoot as good as you think you do. Ethan's voice stayed level, conversational. I'm betting at least 3 of you miss when the pressure's on. Frank Dooley laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. You hear this? He thinks he can take all of us. I don't think anything. I know the numbers. Ethan looked at each man in turn, making eye contact, measuring. 3 will die clean. 2 will take time. 2 will run. Question is which category you fall into. The laughter stopped. Silas spoke for the first time, his voice carrying that accountant's precision. You ordered 3 coffins, not 7. 3's all I need. Confident. Accurate. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, a small movement that put his hand closer to his gun without being obvious about it. Every man on horseback noticed anyway. Your hired help will scatter when it gets real. They're being paid to stand around and look scary, not to die for your pride. That what you think? Marcus Shaw spoke now, his voice tired and professional. You think we're just going to run when you pull iron? I think you're smart enough to know when a job's worth dying for and when it's not. Ethan looked at Shaw directly. How much are they paying you? $20 a month? 30? Is that worth a bullet? Is your pride worth 7? Shaw countered. This isn't about pride. It's about correction. Correction of what? An imbalance. Ethan gestured to the empty street. This town's been bent wrong for 4 years. I'm here to straighten it. Caleb had heard enough. He dismounted in a smooth motion that showed he'd done it 1,000 times, his boots hitting the dirt with authority. You're here to die. You just don't know it yet. Maybe we both die, Ethan said. Would that satisfy you? I don't need satisfaction. I need an example. Caleb walked closer, stopping 10 feet away. The distance men choose when they want to talk, but stay ready. See, Mr. Vale, you've made a miscalculation. You think you can ride into my town, sit at my table, threaten my business, and walk away because you've got some kind of death wish wrapped in principle. But here's what you don't understand. Your death doesn't scare me, it's just business. Then we understand each other. Caleb smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Do we? Because from where I stand, you're a dead man pretending to be brave, and dead men don't change anything. We'll see. Yes, we will. Caleb stepped back, remounted his horse with the same smooth confidence. You've got until Friday, Vale. That's when those coffins are ready, isn't it? Seems fitting. You can spend your last days in Red Hollow thinking about what you've accomplished, which is nothing except guaranteeing you die hard instead of easy. The 7 men turned their horses and rode away, leaving dust and threat hanging in the air. Ethan stood in the street until they were gone, then went back inside where Sarah Mitchell was clutching the door frame like it was the only thing keeping her upright. You're insane, she breathed. Probably. They're going to kill you Friday. They're going to try. What's the difference? Ethan looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her take a step back. Not fear. She'd seen fear plenty in Red Hollow. This was something else. Certainty mixed with sadness, like a man who'd already calculated the cost and decided it was worth paying. The difference, he said quietly, is that I've been ready to die for a long time. Question was always what I'd die for. Now I know. He went back upstairs, leaving Sarah in the hall with tears running down her face for reasons she couldn't quite name. Word of the confrontation spread through Red Hollow like fire through dry grass. By evening, 3 versions were circulating, each more dramatic than the last. In one, Ethan had drawn his gun first. In another, he'd spit at Caleb's feet. In the most elaborate version, he'd quoted scripture and prophesied doom. The truth was less theatrical, but somehow more disturbing. A calm conversation between men who'd already decided to kill each other, just arguing over the schedule. At the Lucky Dollar, the Rourkes held court on their usual table, now restored to its proper emptiness. Whiskey flowed, voices raised, the normal noise of men drinking away the day's heat and their own thoughts. But in the back room, away from the crowd, Caleb sat with his brothers and his 4 hired men, and the conversation was all business. He's bluffing, Jesse said for the 3rd time. 1 man can't take 7. It's math. Math assumes he fights fair, Silas countered. What if he doesn't? What's unfair about 7 against 1? Frank Dooley asked. Ambush, poison, fire. A dozen ways to kill men if you don't care about honor. Marcus Shaw leaned back in his chair, studying the ceiling like it held answers. He's not going to ambush us. That's not what this is about. What is it about, then? Tom Weaver spoke rarely, which made people listen when he did. Proof. Shaw looked at Caleb. He wants to prove something, to the town maybe, or to himself. Men like that don't hide, they make it public. Then we make it more public, Caleb said. Friday, 4 o'clock, Main Street. Everyone watches, he dies in front of the whole town, and everyone remembers what happens when you challenge us. And if he wins? Billy Preston asked, then immediately regretted the question when 6 pairs of eyes turned on him. He won't, Caleb said flatly, because we're not giving him a fair fight. We're giving him a slaughter. They spent the next hour planning it. Angles, positions, who would draw first, who would shoot second, how to ensure Ethan Vale died before he could fire more than once. It was technical, methodical, the kind of planning that turned violence into engineering. Only Marcus Shaw stayed quiet, his expression troubled in a way the others didn't notice. Later, after the meeting broke up and the other men headed downstairs to drink, Shaw lingered. "Something on your mind, Marcus?" Caleb asked. "Just wondering if we're making a mistake. Killing him? Underestimating him." Shaw met Caleb's gaze. "I've known men like Vale. They don't talk about death the way normal people do. They've made peace with it somehow, which makes them dangerous in ways you can't plan for." 7 guns, Marcus. 7. I know. And 7 should be enough. Shaw stood, moved to the door. "But I've lived this long by trusting my instincts, and my instincts say that man's got a plan we haven't thought of yet." "Then think harder." Shaw left without responding, leaving Caleb alone with his whiskey and his certainty. Certainty was a dangerous thing. Caleb had built an empire on it, the certainty that violence worked, that fear controlled people, that might made right in places where law was just a suggestion. That certainty had served him well for 34 years. But sitting in the back room of the Lucky Dollar with Friday approaching like a storm he'd scheduled himself, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. He drank it away and went to bed telling himself that 7 guns couldn't lose to 1, no matter how ready that one man was to die. Wednesday arrived with clouds that promised rain but delivered only oppressive humidity. Ethan was at Lena Hartwell's freight office before sunrise, helping her load another wagon despite her protests. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said, handing him a crate. "So everyone keeps telling me." "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe." Ethan loaded the crate, reached for another. "But Friday, I'll know for sure." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of lifting and loading creating a kind of meditation. When the wagon was full, Lena wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at him with something that might have been concern or might have been anger. "Why do you care?" she asked. "About me, about this town. You don't know us. We're not your problem. Every place where bad men do bad things is my problem." "That's not an answer." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking past her to the town waking up in the gray light. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that hadn't been there before. "Yeah, I had a town once. Small place, not much different from this. Had a wife, a daughter, built furniture, paid my bills, minded my business." He paused. "Then men came. Not as bad as the Rourkes maybe, but bad enough. They wanted protection money. I gave it. They wanted more. I gave that too. Told myself I was being smart, keeping my family safe by not fighting." Lena stood very still, afraid that moving would stop him from finishing. "One day they wanted my shop, everything I'd built. I said no. Finally said no after saying yes 100 times. His jaw tightened. "They burned it down that night. My wife was inside checking inventory. She died choking on smoke from wood I'd cut and planed with my own hands." "I'm sorry," Lena whispered. Being sorry doesn't bring her back, doesn't give my daughter her mother, doesn't change the fact that I could have fought earlier, should have fought, but I kept telling myself that Bending was surviving." He looked at her now. "I was wrong. Bending is just dying slow, fighting is living, even if it kills you. Your daughter lives with my sister in Philadelphia, safe, away from men like the Rourkes." He picked up the last crate. "I send her money every month. Never enough to make up for what I took from her, but it's what I can do. And this, Red Hollow, this is what else I can do. Find places where people are bending and show them they don't have to." Lena felt something break inside her chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from caring too much. "You're going to die Friday." "Probably." "And you think that's worth it?" "I think my wife died because I didn't fight. If I die fighting, at least I die right." He set down the last crate. "Besides, I'm harder to kill than I look." 7 men, Ethan. 3 coffins. He smiled, and it was the saddest smile she'd ever seen. "Trust the numbers." He left her standing by her loaded wagon, crying for the first time since her father died, crying for a stranger who decided her town was worth dying for when she'd almost given up believing it was worth living in. Marshall Carter spent Wednesday drinking and pretending to do paperwork. The arrest reports from the past 4 years sat on his desk, each one a small compromise, each one a piece of the man he'd been traded away for the man he'd become. The knock on his door came at noon. "It's open." Ethan walked in, closed the door behind him, and stood there studying the marshal with eyes that missed nothing. "You're drunk," Ethan observed. "Working on it. Friday's coming." "I noticed." "I need you sober." Carter laughed, but it came out broken. "Why? So I can watch you die with clear eyes? So you can do your job." Ethan pulled a chair around and sat backward on it, arms crossed over the back. "After the shooting stops, someone needs to arrest whoever's left standing. That's assuming you're still alive to arrest. Even if I'm not. Especially if I'm not." Ethan leaned forward. "Here's how this works, Marshal. Friday at 4, I'll be on Main Street. The Rourkes will come. They'll be shooting. When it's over, the law steps in and does what it should have done 4 years ago. And if they kill you, then you arrest them for murder. With what evidence? They'll say you drew first. That's why you'll be watching, close enough to see, far enough to stay safe." Ethan's voice went hard. "This is your chance, Marshal. Your chance to be what you used to be before this town broke you." Carter wanted to throw him out, wanted to take another drink and forget this conversation. Instead, he heard himself asking, "Why does it matter to you what I am?" "Because someone needs to enforce what I start. Someone needs to make it stick." Ethan stood. "I can kill the Rourkes. Probably will. But killing them doesn't fix the system that let them thrive. That takes law. That takes you. I'm not that man anymore." "Then find him again. You've got 2 days." Ethan left, and Marshal Dean Carter sat in his office surrounded by 4 years of failures and a bottle that wasn't empty enough, and tried to remember what courage felt like. Thursday dawned clear and hot, the kind of day where the sun felt personal. Ethan spent the morning walking the street one last time, confirming distances, checking angles, preparing for what he knew was coming. Jacob Buchanan found him at noon, standing in front of the Lucky Dollar, just standing there like a man waiting for something inevitable. "Your coffins are ready," Jacob said. "Good. You want to see them?" "No need. I trust your work." Jacob shifted his weight, uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "Mr. Vale, I've been building coffins a long time. Built them for old folks and young ones, good people and bad. But I've never built coffins for men who ordered them for themselves. These aren't for me. You sure about that?" Ethan turned to look at him, and Jacob saw something in his expression that made him wish he'd stayed in his workshop. "I'm sure about the number 3, not 4, not 7. 3. How can you know?" "Because I've done this before. Different town, different men, same numbers." Jacob wanted to ask more but couldn't quite form the words. Instead he said, "The whole town's talking about tomorrow. Some folks are planning to leave for the day. Others are boarding up windows. A few—" He paused. "A few are hoping you win." "Just a few?" "Most people think hope's dangerous, safer to expect the worst." "Maybe they're right." Ethan looked back at the Lucky Dollar. "But sometimes the worst doesn't come. Sometimes the numbers work out different than everyone expects." He walked away, leaving Jacob standing in the street with the names of 3 dead men he hadn't met yet running through his mind. That evening, Lena Hartwell did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She walked into the marshal's office and demanded he listen. Carter looked up from his desk, surprised. They'd barely spoken since her father died, both of them trapped in their own versions of guilt. "Lena, don't." She held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here because tomorrow that stranger is going to die, trying to do what you should have done years ago, and I want to know if you're going to let his death mean nothing." Carter felt the words hit like physical blows. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to be there, on the street, ready." Her voice broke slightly. "My father believed in the law, believed that badges meant something, that justice would come. He died still believing it. Don't make his faith worthless." "Lena, I can't." "You can. You just won't." She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "That man, Ethan Vale, he told me about his wife, about how she died because he didn't fight when he should have. He's spent years trying to make up for that one moment of cowardice." She looked back at Carter. "How many years will you spend running from yours?" She left, and Carter sat in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of every compromise, every surrender, every time he'd chosen survival over justice. The bottle sat on his desk, still half full. He looked at it for a long time. Then slowly, he poured it out onto the floor and watched 4 years of liquid cowardice soak into the wood. Friday would come whether he was ready or not. He decided to be ready. Friday morning broke with a sky so clear it looked like someone had scrubbed it clean just for the occasion. Ethan woke at 5, the same way he'd woken every morning for the past 3 years, suddenly, completely, with his hand already reaching for the gun he kept under his pillow. Old habits from older days when sleeping deep meant not waking up at all. He dressed slowly, methodically. Clean shirt, the one without holes. Pants he'd brushed the dust from the night before. Boots oiled and ready. Not vanity, just respect for what was coming. A man should look decent when he goes to meet his fate, whatever that fate turns out to be. The Colt came next. He checked the cylinder, rotated it, listened for the smooth click that meant everything was aligned right. 6 rounds. He'd cleaned it last night, the ritual of disassembly and reassembly as familiar as breathing. The gun was 10 years old, bought used in Colorado from a man who'd lost the need for it after a knife fight went wrong. Ethan had carried it through 5 towns and 4 confrontations, and it had never failed him yet. He hoped today wouldn't be the first time. Downstairs, Sarah Mitchell was already in the kitchen, making coffee with hands that shook enough to rattle the pot. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes were red from crying or not sleeping, probably both. "You're really doing this," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "I could lock the door, refuse to let you leave." "You could try." He sat at the small table, accepted the coffee she poured with trembling hands. "Wouldn't change anything. I'd just go out a window. Then I'd bar the windows." "Sarah." He said her name gently, the way you'd gentle a spooked horse. "This isn't something you can stop. It's already in motion." She sat down across from him, her own coffee forgotten. "My husband died in the war, Chancellorsville. They sent me a letter that said he died bravely, defending his country. All the proper words that mean nothing when you're alone at night." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "You know what I learned from that letter? That dying for a cause doesn't make the dying hurt less. Not for the person dead, and especially not for the people left behind." "I know. Do you?" "Because you're about to make someone else learn that lesson." Ethan thought of his daughter in Philadelphia, 14 years old now, growing up without him, growing up with the memory of a mother who'd burned to death while he'd counted his money, and told himself he was being smart. "I already taught that lesson once. Worst thing I've ever done." "Then why do it again?" "Because maybe this time the lesson's different. Maybe this time someone learns that standing up is possible, that it works." He drank his coffee, felt the bitter heat of it. "Even if I die proving it." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 4 o'clock, they're saying. Main Street. That's right. The whole town will be watching. That's the point." He finished his coffee, stood. "Thank you for the room, and the coffee, and for caring enough to try to stop me. Will you come back?" Her voice was small, almost a whisper. "After? If I can." "And if you can't?" Ethan pulled an envelope from his pocket, set it on the table. "There's money here. Enough for 2 months' rent and then some. Give it to Lena Hartwell if I don't make it back. Tell her to use it for her business." Sarah stared at the envelope like it was a death warrant, which, in a way, it was. "You've already accepted you're going to die. I've accepted it's possible. Not the same thing." He moved toward the door, then paused. "But if it happens, I want to make sure something good comes from it." He left her sitting at the table with the envelope and her tears, and stepped out into a morning that felt like the last morning, even though he told himself it wouldn't be. The town was already awake, already knowing. News of the 4 o'clock confrontation had spread the way news does in small places. Fast, thorough, impossible to contain. People moved through their morning routines with the distracted air of folks waiting for a storm, doing normal things while expecting everything to change. At the general store, Albert Morrison was taking inventory of items he didn't need to count, just to keep his hands busy. His wife Mary was in the back room, packing a bag they probably wouldn't need, but might, just in case the shooting spread beyond Main Street. At the bank, Samuel Whitmore was reviewing accounts and trying not to think about the fact that he'd voted against standing up to the Rourkes 3 separate times when the town council had discussed it. Each time he'd justified it with numbers, the cost of resistance, the value of stability, the price of peace, even if that peace was built on fear. Now those numbers felt like epitaphs. At the Lucky Dollar, Marcus Webb was opening early, knowing that men would want whiskey before the afternoon arrived. Dutch courage, they called it, though Marcus had never understood why the Dutch got blamed for cowardice everyone felt. The saloon was empty except for one man sitting at the bar, nursing a drink he hadn't touched. Marshal Dean Carter looked up when Marcus approached. "It's early for you to be here. It's that kind of day." Marcus studied the lawman's face, saw something there he hadn't seen in years. "You're sober. For now. Planning to stay that way?" Carter touched his badge, the metal warm from his body heat. "Planning to try." "You gonna be there? On the street?" "That's what he asked me to do." "Vale?" "Yeah." Carter finally lifted his drink, discovered it was just water. He didn't remember ordering water. "He asked me to do my job. Novel concept." Marcus wiped down the bar out of habit, not need. "What if he wins?" "Then I arrest the Rourkes for attempted murder. Public witnesses, clear intent. And if he loses? Then I arrest whoever's left for killing him. The Rourkes won't let you. They might not have a choice." Carter's voice was quiet, but carried something that hadn't been there in years. Conviction. 4 years I've let them run this town. 4 years of looking away, making excuses, choosing easy over right. Today that ends, one way or another. You might die too. I've been dead for 4 years, Marcus. Just kept walking around pretending otherwise. He stood, left coins on the bar for the water. Might as well die doing something that matters. He walked out into the morning, leaving Marcus alone with his bottles and his own reckoning. Across town, in the office above the Lucky Dollar that served as their headquarters, the Rourke brothers were having breakfast and discussing murder with the casual efficiency of men planning a business transaction. 4 positions, Silas was saying, moving salt shakers around the table like pieces on a chessboard. Frank and Tom on the rooftops, north and south. Billy and Marcus at ground level, flanking. We take the center. He'll expect that, Jesse said around a mouthful of eggs. Doesn't matter what he expects. It's 7 guns, mathematics. Caleb had been quiet, eating his breakfast with deliberate slowness, thinking through angles the way he always did. Marcus is having doubts. Marcus always has doubts, Jesse said. That's why he's still alive. This is different. Caleb pushed his plate away, half the food uneaten. He thinks Vale's got a plan we haven't considered. What plan? Jesse laughed. He's one man, one gun. What's he gonna do? Split himself into 7 pieces? He's not worried about the shooting. He's worried about what comes after. Silas looked up from his tactical arrangement of salt shakers. The marshal, maybe. Caleb stood, walked to the window, looked down at Main Street already preparing for afternoon. Some shopkeepers were boarding windows. Others were just closing early, putting up signs about being back tomorrow, as if tomorrow would be any different than yesterday. Carter's been in his office since dawn, sober from what I hear. So what? He's been scared of us for 4 years. One stranger doesn't change that, doesn't it? Caleb turned from the window. Think about it. We've controlled this town by making examples. Show people what happens when they resist, and nobody resists. But Vale's not from here. He doesn't have history with us. Doesn't have family we can threaten or property we can destroy. He's immune to the tools we use. Then we use the oldest tool, Jesse said, patting his gun. Bullets work on everyone. Bullets kill him. But what about what he represents? Caleb shook his head. He's already changed things just by showing up. People are talking, wondering, asking themselves why one stranger has the guts to do what none of them would. Let them wonder. Jesse stood, restless energy making him pace. After we kill him, they'll remember why they were scared in the first place. Silas was still studying his salt shakers, running numbers in his head. Unless we don't kill him. Both brothers turned to look at him. Explain, Caleb said. I mean, what if he actually wins? Unlikely, yes, but possible. Silas moved the shakers again, calculating odds. 7 against 1, but if he positions right, uses cover, forces us to shoot each other in the crossfire, it's theoretically possible. You're overthinking, Jesse said. I'm being realistic. And realistically, we should have a contingency. Which is, we don't all engage. One of us stays back, far back. If it goes wrong, if the numbers somehow fail, we have someone left to regroup, to rebuild. Caleb considered this, running through scenarios the way he'd learned to run through them over 34 years of staying alive in a profession that killed most men by 30. Who stays back? You, Silas said. You're the leader, the one who keeps this whole thing together. If the worst happens, you survive to come back stronger. That's coward's logic. That's survivor's logic. There's a difference. Jesse was shaking his head. We all fight. We all finish this. Otherwise, we look weak. We look smart, Silas countered. Smart enough to protect our investment. The argument went on for another 20 minutes, voices rising and falling, until finally Caleb made a decision that he'd regret for the rest of his considerably shortened life. We all fight, he said. All of us. Show the town that we're not afraid of one man, no matter how ready to die he is. He looked at each of his brothers. We end this together. Clean, public, permanent. Silas nodded slowly, accepting the decision even though his accountant's brain was screaming that the numbers didn't guarantee what they needed them to guarantee. Jesse grinned, the expression of a man who'd been waiting for permission to do what he wanted to do anyway. And somewhere in the back of Caleb's mind, a small voice whispered that maybe Marcus Shaw's doubts weren't as foolish as he'd thought. By noon, Red Hollow was a town holding its breath. Businesses were closed, windows shuttered, the street empty in a way that felt unnatural for midday. It was like everyone had agreed to pretend the town didn't exist, hoping that if they ignored the coming violence, it would ignore them back. Ethan spent the early afternoon in his room, not hiding, just preparing. He'd laid out his gun, his ammunition, his hat. Everything in its place, everything checked and rechecked. Not nervousness, just thoroughness. The difference between men who survived gunfights and men who died in them often came down to which one had checked their ammunition one more time. At 2 o'clock, there was a knock on his door. Lena Hartwell stood in the hallway, holding something wrapped in cloth. She looked like she'd been crying, but had stopped recently enough that her eyes were still red. "Can I come in?" Ethan stepped aside, let her enter. She looked around the sparse room, at the gun laid out on the bed, at the man who'd rearranged her understanding of courage. "I brought you something." She handed him the cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a vest, thick leather reinforced with what looked like thin plates of iron. Crude armor, frontier style, the kind that might stop a bullet if you were lucky and the bullet was tired. "My father wore this," Lena said, "during the range wars in '76. Saved his life twice." Her voice caught. "Didn't help when Jesse Rourke shot him in the face, but maybe it'll help you." Ethan held the vest, felt its weight. "This is too valuable to... It's no use to me. I'm not the one fighting." She looked at him directly. "But you are. And I want you to have every chance of walking away from this." "Lena, don't tell me it's not my fight. Don't tell me to stay out of it." Her voice was fierce now, anger and fear mixing into something sharp. "You're doing this for people like me. The least I can do is give you my father's armor." Ethan put on the vest. It fit reasonably well, the leather worn soft by years of use, the iron plates positioned over vital organs in a way that showed someone had thought carefully about where bullets tended to hit. "Thank you. Don't thank me, just live." She moved toward the door, stopped. After it's over, if you're still alive, come to my office. I'll have coffee ready and questions." "I'll try." She left without another word, and Ethan stood alone in his room wearing a dead man's armor, preparing to face 7 live men's guns. At 3 o'clock, Marcus Shaw knocked on the door of the room he rented above the livery stable and waited while his wife Clara opened it. She took one look at his face and knew. "You're not coming back." "Probably not." He stepped inside, closed the door. "I've saved money. It's in the tin under our bed. Enough for 6 months if you're careful, maybe a year if you're smart. Take it and go to your sister's in Denver." Clara was already shaking her head. "I'm not leaving." "Clara, I'm not leaving you, and I'm not leaving this town just because 3 bullies think they own it." She grabbed his arms, forced him to look at her. "We've lived here for 8 years. We have friends, a life. I'm not running." "This isn't running, it's surviving." "It's the same thing." She released him, stepped back. "That man, Vale. He's right, isn't he? Someone has to stand up." "Standing up is how you get buried. So is kneeling. Just takes longer." Claire's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You've been working for the Rourkes for 2 years. I've watched it eat at you piece by piece. You come home smelling like guilt and whiskey, and you won't look me in the eye anymore. Is that the man you want to be? It's the man who keeps you fed. I'd rather be hungry with a husband I respect than full with one who hates himself. Marcus sat down heavily on their bed, the weight of 2 years of compromises suddenly too much to carry standing up. If I don't fight, they'll kill me anyway. They don't leave loose ends. Then fight, but fight for something that matters. I'm not a hero, Clara. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to be the man I married, the one who told me he'd never hurt innocent people, no matter what. She knelt in front of him. That man is still in there. I can see him sometimes when you think I'm not looking. Bring him back. They sat together in silence for a long time, holding each other the way people do when they know it might be the last time. Finally, Marcus stood. I need to go. I know. I love you. I know that too. She kissed him, tasting salt from tears she wouldn't let fall until he was gone. Come back to me. I'll try. He left, and Clara sat on their bed and pulled out the tin of money and counted it and wondered if being right was worth being alone. By 3:30, Main Street was empty but surrounded. Every window held faces. Every doorway had people pressed into shadows, watching, waiting. The whole town had become an audience to something they didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. Sarah Mitchell stood in her boarding house window, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Ben and Sam Hodges watched from the Lucky Dollar, both of them drinking to steady nerves that wouldn't steady. Charlie Kern the barber had locked his shop but stood behind his window with his hands pressed against the glass. Jacob Buchanan waited in his workshop, surrounded by 3 coffins that were either prophecy or hope, depending on how the next hour went. And on the second floor of his office, Marshal Dean Carter checked his gun for the 5th time, adjusted his badge, and tried to remember the words to the oath he'd taken when he'd first pinned on a star. Something about upholding the law and protecting the innocent. The exact words were lost to time and whiskey, but the meaning remained. At 5 minutes to 4, Ethan Vale walked out of Sarah Mitchell's boarding house and into the empty street. He'd left his hat behind. Wanted his vision clear, his peripheral unobstructed. The vest Lena had given him was hidden under his shirt, the weight of it a reminder that someone believed he was worth saving. His Colt rode on his hip, and his hands hung loose and ready at his sides. The sun was behind him, low enough in the western sky to put anyone facing him at a disadvantage. He'd planned that too, calculated the time and angle, using every advantage he could find because 7 against 1 didn't leave room for fairness. He walked to the center of the street, to the spot he'd marked in his mind 2 days ago. The place where sight lines converged and distances balanced, and a man with good aim and better luck might just survive the next 60 seconds. Then he waited. At 4 o'clock exactly, the Rourke brothers and their 4 hired men emerged from the Lucky Dollar. They spread out the way they'd planned, Silas's salt shaker tactics made real. Frank Dooley and Tom Weaver moved to positions that gave them height. Billy Preston and Marcus Shaw flanked wide, creating a killing box with Ethan at the center. The 3 brothers stayed in the middle, a line of matched violence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The town held its breath, every watcher pressed against their windows, every heart beating too fast. Then Caleb Rourke's voice cut through the silence. You're either the bravest man I've met or the dumbest. Haven't decided which yet. Does it matter? Ethan's voice was calm, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of about to kill each other. Suppose not. Dead is dead, regardless of the reason. That's true for all of us. Jesse laughed, high and nervous. You think you're walking away from this? I think 3 of you aren't. Ethan's eyes moved across the 7 men, measuring, calculating. Question is, which 3? Big talk for a man who's about to... Ethan never found out what he was about to do, because that's when Marcus Shaw made a choice that changed everything. I'm out. The words dropped into the tension like stones into still water. Every head turned toward Shaw, standing on the south flank with his gun still holstered. What? Jesse's voice was tight with disbelief. I said, I'm out. Shaw took a step back, hands raised away from his weapon. This isn't what I signed on for. You want to kill each other? Do it without me. Caleb's face went dark. You walk away now. You're done in this town. Dead to us. Better dead to you than dead for real. Shaw took another step back. I've got a wife. A life. And this, he gestured at the standoff, this isn't worth dying for. You coward! Jesse started forward, but Silas grabbed his arm. Let him go, Silas said quietly. We don't need him. Shaw turned and walked away, each step deliberate, waiting for the bullet in his back that didn't come. He made it to the alley, disappeared into shadows, and kept walking until the sound of his own heartbeat was louder than the silence he'd left behind. In a window above the dress shop, Clara Shaw watched her husband choose life over money and started crying for the first time in years. Now it was 6 against 1. Anyone else? Ethan asked. Billy Preston looked at Frank Dooley, young eyes asking a question his mouth couldn't form. Frank shook his head once, sharp and final. They were staying. Caleb's voice went cold. No more interruptions, no more talk. You came here looking for a fight, Vale. You found one. I came here looking for justice. Fighting's just the tool. Justice. Caleb shook his head. You know what justice is in a place like this? It's strength, power, the ability to take what you want and keep it. We built this town into something that works, something profitable. You're trying to tear that down for what? Principle? Morality? For the people you've been bleeding for 4 years. They were surviving fine until you showed up. Surviving isn't living. Jesse was done with philosophy. His hand moved toward his gun, fast, but not quite fast enough to catch Ethan unprepared. Time didn't slow down the way stories say it does. It just clarified, each moment becoming distinct and separate, like frames in a moving picture show. Ethan's hand was already moving, muscle memory and preparation combining into motion that looked effortless but was the product of practice and pain. His Colt cleared leather just as Jesse's did. 2 shots split the afternoon. Jesse's went wide, high, and right, the aim thrown off by eagerness and fear mixing into something sloppy. Ethan's hit center mass, punching through Jesse's chest with the wet sound of lead meeting meat. Jesse looked down at the spreading red on his shirt, surprised in the way people always are when dying turns from abstract to real. He tried to raise his gun again, but his arm wouldn't respond to what his brain was screaming. He dropped to his knees, then forward onto his face, and stopped moving. The first coffin had found its occupant. Everything erupted. Frank Dooley fired from his rooftop position, the bullet kicking up dust where Ethan had been standing a second before. But Ethan was already moving, diving left toward the water trough he'd marked days ago, using it for cover while his mind processed positions and angles. Tom Weaver fired next, his shot clipping the trough's metal rim, sending sparks and splinters of wood into the air. Billy Preston fired wild, panic making him spray bullets that hit nothing but storefront walls and empty air. Caleb and Silas held their positions, didn't fire, waiting for Ethan to expose himself. Smart, dangerous. Exactly what Ethan had expected from them. He rolled behind the trough, came up firing. His first shot caught Billy Preston in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hit lower, stomach, the kind of wound that killed slow and painful. Billy went down screaming, clutching his gut, out of the fight even if he wasn't dead yet. The second coffin was claiming someone, even if it hadn't quite killed him yet. From above, Frank Dooley was trying to get an angle, leaning over the roof edge. Too far, too exposed. Ethan fired twice. The first shot missed. The second caught Frank in the throat. A lucky hit or a skilled one, impossible to tell. Frank's gun clattered to the street below, followed a second later by Frank himself, landing hard and not getting up. 3 down, 3 left. The numbers were equalizing. Tom Weaver abandoned his rooftop position, the exposure too dangerous now that his partner was dead. He hit the street running, trying to flank around to catch Ethan from behind. He made it 3 steps before Marshal Dean Carter stepped out of the alley he'd been watching from, gun drawn and voice steady. That's far enough, Tom. Tom spun, bringing his gun around, and Carter shot him. Once, twice, 3 times, each shot hitting center mass the way they'd taught him in Kansas, back when he'd been the kind of lawman who didn't hesitate. Tom Weaver collapsed in the street, bleeding out onto dirt that had seen too much blood already. In the windows, people stared in shock. The marshal had actually done something, chosen a side. After 4 years of neutrality, Dean Carter had picked justice over survival. Now it was 3 against 2. Ethan and Carter made eye contact across the street, a moment of recognition and respect passing between them. Then they both turned their attention to the remaining Rourke brothers. Caleb was backing toward the lucky dollar, gun drawn but not firing, calculating odds that were no longer in his favor. Silas stayed close, covering his brother's retreat with his own weapon. "This is over," Carter called out, his voice carrying the authority his badge had been missing for years. "Drop your weapons. You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and about 4 years' worth of other crimes I'll document once you're in a cell." Caleb laughed, but it came out hollow. "You think this is over? You think one stranger and a marshal who found his spine changes anything? I think 3 of your men are dead and the other one ran," Ethan called back. "I think the math's different than you expected." "Math changes." Caleb's gun came up fast, aimed not at Ethan, but at Carter. The shot cracked across the street. Carter felt the impact before he heard the sound, the bullet punching into his left shoulder and spinning him around. He went down hard, his gun skittering away across the dust. Ethan fired back, but Caleb and Silas were already through the Lucky Dollar's doors, disappearing into the darkness inside. The standoff had become a siege. Ethan ran to where Carter lay, blood spreading across his shirt. "How bad?" "Shoulder. Hurts like hell, but I'll live." Carter's teeth were gritted against pain. "They're holed up in there. They can't get out without going through us." "Can you move?" "Give me a minute." "We might not have a minute." From inside the Lucky Dollar, glass shattered. A moment later, smoke began pouring from the windows. The Rourke brothers were burning their own headquarters, creating cover for an escape. "They're running," Carter said. "We're setting a trap." Ethan helped Carter to his feet, supporting him with one arm while keeping his gun ready with the other. They moved back from the building as flames started licking at the window frames. People were emerging from their hiding places now, seeing the smoke, grabbing buckets, forming the chain that every frontier town practiced for the nightmare of fire. In the confusion, Ethan saw movement, 2 figures slipping out the back of the Lucky Dollar, heading for the alley behind. He left Carter with Sarah Mitchell, who'd rushed from her boarding house to help, and went after them. The alley was narrow, dark, lined with refuse and broken dreams. Ethan moved carefully, gun raised, every shadow a potential ambush. He found Silas first, or rather, Silas found him. The shot came from behind a stack of crates, close enough that Ethan felt the heat of it pass his cheek. He dove sideways, returned fire, heard a grunt of pain. When he looked, Silas was on the ground, clutching his leg, his gun just out of reach. "It's over," Ethan said, moving closer but staying cautious. "Nothing's over." Silas's face was twisted with pain and rage. "You've destroyed years of work, killed my brothers. For what? So these people can pretend they're free? They are free. They're weak. They need someone strong to... They need someone to leave them alone." Ethan kicked Silas's gun away. "Where's Caleb?" Silas laughed, coughed blood. "Gone. Out the other side. He's smarter than you think." "Then I'll find him." "You can try." Silas's eyes were dimming, the leg wound worse than it looked. "But he'll come back. He always comes back. And when he does..." Whatever Caleb would do when he came back, Silas didn't finish. His eyes glazed over, his breathing stopped, and the third coffin claimed its final resident. Ethan stood in the alley, surrounded by smoke and shadows, and realized that for the first time in 4 years, Red Hollow was quiet in a way that didn't feel like fear. Behind him, the town was fighting the fire that the Rourkes had started. In front of him, somewhere in the maze of alleys and buildings, Caleb Rourke was running. But running wasn't the same as escaping, and the number said 3 coffins, not 4, which meant Caleb Rourke was still living on borrowed time. Ethan reloaded his Colt and went to collect what was owed. The smoke from the Lucky Dollar was thick enough to taste, black and oily, carrying the smell of whiskey and burning wood and 4 years of corruption going up in flames. Ethan moved through the alley with his gun raised, following the trail Caleb had left. Scuff marks in the dirt, a dropped hat, the signs of a man running instead of thinking. Behind him, the sounds of the bucket brigade echoed between buildings. Voices shouted orders, coordinating the effort to save structures that had watched violence happen and done nothing. The fire was spreading, jumping from the Lucky Dollar to the building next door, and if they didn't contain it soon, half of Main Street would be ash by morning. But that wasn't Ethan's concern right now. His concern was a man who'd built an empire on fear and was learning what it felt like to be afraid. The alley opened onto a side street that ran parallel to Main, where smaller businesses struggled in the shadow of larger ones. A seamstress shop, closed. A cobbler's, empty. and at the far end, the livery stable where horses stamped and whinnied at the smell of smoke. Ethan saw the stable door hanging open and knew. He approached carefully, keeping to the side of the building, using the wall for cover. Inside, he could hear movement, the shuffle of boots, the jingle of tack being grabbed, the sounds of a man preparing to run. "It's over, Caleb," Ethan called out, not entering yet. "Your brothers are dead. Your men scattered or killed. There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Caleb's voice emerged from the darkness of the stable, rough with smoke and something that might have been grief or might have been rage. "My brothers?" The words came out flat, like he was testing them, seeing if saying them made them real. "Jesse and Silas. Both of them." Another pause. Then, "Jesse was always too fast with his gun. Told him that speed without thought gets you killed. He never listened." "And Silas?" "Silas thought everything was numbers. Thought you could calculate your way through life." A bitter laugh. "Guess some problems don't add up the way you expect." Ethan shifted position, moving closer to the door. "Come out, Caleb. Make this easy." "Easy." The word was spat like a curse. "Nothing about this is easy. You come into my town, sit at my table, kill my brothers, and you want easy? It's not your town. Never was. You just convinced people it was through blood and fear. Same thing. No, it's not." Ethan was at the doorway now, peering into the dim interior. He could make out shapes, horses in stalls, tack hanging on walls, and in the far corner the silhouette of a man saddling a horse with shaking hands. "A town belongs to the people who live there. You were just a parasite feeding on them." Caleb turned, and even in the shadows, Ethan could see his gun already drawn. "Parasites survive. Heroes die. Which one are you, Vale?" "Neither. I'm just a man settling accounts." "For who? The town? They didn't ask for your help. They didn't know how to ask." Ethan took a step inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. "But I saw it in their faces. The way they looked away when your brothers walked past. The way they hurried their children inside. The way they'd stopped hoping things could be different. Hope's expensive. Most people can't afford it. That's why someone has to give it to them." Caleb laughed again, but there was no humor in it, just the sound of something breaking. "You think killing us gives them hope? You think anything changes? Tomorrow, someone else will come. Someone stronger, meaner, and they'll bend the same way they bent for us. Maybe. But they'll remember that someone stood up, someone fought. And that memory makes the next fight easier. Philosophy from a killer." Caleb's gun hand was steady now, the shaking gone, replaced by the calm that comes when you've accepted what's about to happen. "That's rich." "I never said I wasn't a killer. I just choose what I kill." Ethan raised his own gun, matching Caleb's stance. "And right now, I'm choosing you." They stood that way for a long moment. Two men in a stable filled with nervous horses and the smell of hay and leather, both knowing that one of them wasn't walking out. "The Coffins," Caleb said suddenly. "You really ordered just 3? Just 3. Not 4? Not one for yourself?" "I don't plan on dying today." "Nobody plans on it. It just happens." Caleb's finger moved on the trigger, a microscopic shift that Ethan saw because he'd been watching for it. "But I'll give you credit. You were right about the number." "I usually am." They drew simultaneously, or as close to simultaneous as two men can manage when one of them is 34 years of ruthless survival and the other is tired righteousness looking for redemption. Caleb's shot went first, the sound enormous in the enclosed space. It caught Ethan in the chest, dead center, the impact like being kicked by a horse. But the leather vest Lena had given him, her father's armor from a different war, did what it was designed to do. The iron plate beneath the leather caught the bullet, stopped it, distributed the impact across ribs that cracked but didn't break, flesh that bruised but didn't tear. Ethan went down anyway, the force of it taking his legs out from under him, but he was already firing as he fell. His first shot hit Caleb in the right shoulder, spinning him around. The second caught him in the side, punching through muscle and into organs that weren't designed to have holes in them. Caleb staggered, tried to bring his gun up for another shot, but his arm wouldn't cooperate. Blood was spreading fast across his shirt, too much blood, the kind that meant minutes rather than hours. He dropped to his knees, his gun falling from nerveless fingers, and looked at Ethan with something that might have been respect or might have been hate. Probably both. "You're wearing armor," he said, and there was almost admiration in his voice. "Smart. I should have thought of that." Ethan pushed himself to his feet, each breath sending fire through his ribs. The vest had saved his life, but it hadn't made the bullet feel good. "You should have thought of a lot of things." "Like what?" "Like what happens when you push people far enough that they stop being afraid of dying." Ethan walked closer, his gun still trained on Caleb, even though the man was clearly finished. "Like what happens when someone comes along who's already lost everything that mattered and has nothing left to lose." Caleb coughed, tasted copper. "You lost someone." "My wife. Men like you killed her." "Not me." "Close enough." Ethan's voice was hard. "You're all the same, different names, different towns, same disease. You find a place where law is weak and people are scared, and you take what you want because you can." "And you're the cure?" Caleb laughed, coughed blood. "You're just another kind of killer, Vale. Don't pretend you're better than me." "I don't." Ethan lowered his gun slightly. "But I kill things that need killing. You killed things that got in your way. That's the difference." Caleb was fading fast, his breathing shallow and wet. "My brothers are dead. All three of you, just like the Coffins promised." 3 coffins. Caleb's eyes were dimming. "You really knew the number." "I told you. I'm usually right." Caleb tried to say something else, but the words turned into a rattling breath that went out and didn't come back in. He slumped forward onto the stable floor, and the last Rourke brother stopped being a threat to anyone. Ethan stood over him for a moment, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle onto shoulders that were already carrying too much. 3 men dead by his hand, 4 if you counted Tom Weaver, who Carter had shot. 4 lives ended, regardless of whether they deserved ending or not. He reloaded his Colt with hands that shook slightly, then walked back out into the late afternoon light. The fire on Main Street was under control now, the Bucket Brigade having managed to contain it to just the Lucky Dollar and the building next door. Both were burning themselves out, reduced to blackened skeletons that would stand as reminders of what happened when empires built on fear finally collapsed. People were emerging from their hiding places, cautious at first, then with growing confidence as they realized the shooting had stopped and the silence that followed wasn't the prelude to more violence, but the aftermath of ending. Ethan found Marshal Carter sitting on the steps of the doctor's office, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but determined. Sarah Mitchell stood nearby, keeping watch over him the way you'd watch over something fragile that might break if left alone. "Caleb?" Carter asked when he saw Ethan approaching. "Dead, in the livery stable." Carter nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer but needed to hear it confirmed. "And the others?" "Jesse in the street, Silas in the alley. Billy Preston's gut shot but might live if the doctor's good. Frank Dooley and Tom Weaver won't need a doctor." 5 dead, 1 wounded, 1 ran. Carter did the math. "That's a lot of blood for one afternoon." "That's what happens when you let poison fester for 4 years. Cutting it out is never clean." Ethan sat down next to Carter, his ribs screaming in protest. "But it's done now." "Is it?" Carter looked out at the town, at the people slowly emerging into a red hollow that was fundamentally different from the one they'd woken up in that morning. "Killing the Rourkes doesn't fix what they broke. Doesn't give people back the years they spent afraid." "No. But it gives them years ahead where they don't have to be." "You sound certain." "I've done this before. Different town, different names, same result." Ethan winced as he shifted position. The first week, people don't believe it. They keep waiting for the other boot to drop, for someone worse to show up. Second week, they start to remember what normal felt like. By the third week, they're making plans again. Building instead of just surviving. "And you?" "I'm usually gone by then." Carter studied him, this stranger who'd ridden into town 5 days ago and changed everything. "Where will you go?" "Wherever the next Red Hollow is. There's always another town where bad men do bad things and good people look away." Ethan pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, handed it to Carter. "But before I go, you need to send this." Carter unfolded it. Read the carefully written words. It was a request for a circuit judge, along with a detailed account of the Rourke's activities over the past 4 years. Names, dates, crimes. Everything documented with the precision of a man who'd learned that killing the problem wasn't enough if you didn't fix the system that allowed it. "You wrote this when?" Carter asked. "Tuesday night, after I ordered the coffins." "You were that sure?" "I was that prepared." Ethan stood, his ribs protesting every movement. "The judge should be here in a week, maybe 2. When he arrives, you'll have witnesses ready, people who'll testify about what the Rourkes did, what they took, who they hurt." "They won't want to testify. They'll be scared." They were scared of living men with guns. Dead men are easier to talk about. Ethan looked at Carter directly. "But they'll need someone to lead them, someone wearing a badge who actually believes in what it means." Carter touched his badge reflexively, the metal still warm from his body heat, still stained with his own blood. "I'm not sure I know what it means anymore." "Then figure it out. You've got time now, time you bought by standing up when it mattered." Before Carter could respond, Lena Hartwell was pushing through the crowd, her face flushed from running or emotion or both. When she saw Ethan, she stopped short, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "You're alive." Disappointed? Relieved. She moved closer. "The vest?" "Saved my life. Your father's gift from beyond the grave." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "He'd be glad. He always said that armor was meant to protect people who actually gave a damn." "I give a damn." "I noticed." She glanced at Carter, then back to Ethan. "The whole town noticed. You did what we should have done ourselves." "You would have eventually. Someone just needed to show you it was possible." "Is that what you tell yourself? That you're just the example?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I tell myself that my wife died because I waited too long to fight, and that every time I help someone else fight sooner, it weighs a little less. Doesn't forgive what I did, doesn't bring her back, but it's something." Lena reached out, touched his arm gently. "It's more than something. It's everything to people like me. Your freight business will thrive now, without the Rourkes squeezing me out, without their threats keeping customers away." She smiled, but it was bittersweet. "You gave me back my future, Ethan Vale. That's not nothing. Just make sure you use it. Build something worth protecting." "I will." She hesitated, then, "You could stay. Help rebuild. The town could use someone like you." "The town needs to learn to stand without me. That's the whole point." Ethan looked out at Red Hollow, at the people gathering in the street, talking in voices that weren't whispered, standing straight instead of hunched. "Besides, I'm not the staying kind." "Because you're looking for the next fight?" "Because staying means putting down roots, and roots mean something to lose." He met her eyes. "I already learned what losing feels like. Not interested in a repeat lesson." Lena understood, even though she didn't like it. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Early." "That soon?" "The longer I stay, the harder it gets to go. And I need to go." He pulled out another envelope, this one thicker than the first. "This is for you. Money for your business. Consider it an investment in Red Hollow's future." "Ethan, I can't." "You can and you will. Use it to expand, to hire help, to turn your freight company into something that employs half the town." He pressed it into her hands. "Make me right about this place being worth saving." She took the envelope, clutching it like a lifeline. "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by living, really living, not just surviving. That's all the thanks I need." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion near the doctor's office. People were gathering, and in the center of the crowd, Billy Preston was being carried on a makeshift stretcher, his face gray with pain and blood loss. The doctor, a thin man named Harrison who'd been treating ailments in Red Hollow for 15 years, met them at the door. "Get him inside. I'll do what I can, but gut shots are tricky." "Will he live?" someone asked. "Depends on whether he wants to." Harrison looked at Ethan. "You do this?" "I did." "He was shooting at you?" "He was." Harrison nodded, filed that information away for later, and turned his attention to keeping Billy Preston alive. Whether that was mercy or justice was something each person would have to decide for themselves. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus Shaw appeared, moving through people who looked at him with mixed expressions, some angry that he'd run, others understanding why he had. His wife Clara was with him, her hand in his, a united front against whatever judgment came. Shaw walked up to Ethan, stopped a respectful distance away. "I want you to know, you don't owe me explanations," Ethan cut him off. "You made a choice, a smart one. Some people think I'm a coward. Some people aren't married to someone they love. You had something worth protecting. That's not cowardice. That's priorities." Ethan looked at Clara, then back to Shaw. "You get to grow old with her. That's more than most gunfighters can say." Shaw's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just remember what happened here. Remember that standing up is possible, even if you don't always have to be the one standing." Ethan started to turn away, then paused. "And Marcus? Find honest work. Whatever the Rourkes were paying you, it wasn't worth what it cost." "I know. I knew it then too. Just took me too long to admit it." Shaw and his wife walked away hand in hand, heading toward a future that was suddenly open instead of predetermined. Ethan watched them go and felt something that might have been envy. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange combination of celebration and mourning. The Rourkes were dead, which meant freedom, but freedom had come at the cost of blood in the streets and fire on Main Street. People didn't quite know how to feel, so they felt everything at once: relief and guilt, joy and sorrow, hope and uncertainty all mixed together. By evening, someone had organized a gathering at the church, the first public meeting in 4 years where people felt safe speaking openly. Ethan didn't attend. This was their moment, their town, their future to figure out. He'd done his part. Instead, he sat on the porch of Sarah Mitchell's boarding house, watching the sun set over Red Hollow, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire and blood. Sarah brought him coffee without being asked, sat down in the chair next to his. They were quiet for a while, just watching the day die and the night arrive. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said finally. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "You could stay. People would want you to stay." "People want what I represent, not what I am. There's a difference." "What do you represent?" "Hope, I suppose. Proof that fighting back works." He sipped his coffee, winced as the movement pulled at his bruised ribs. "But I'm just a man who's good at violence and bad at staying still. They'll figure out soon enough that I'm not the hero they think I am." "What are you then?" Ethan thought about that, really thought about it. "I'm someone who couldn't save the person that mattered most, so now I save people who don't matter to me at all. It's not noble. It's just the only way I know how to keep breathing." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Your wife would be proud of what you did here. My wife would be alive if I'd done it sooner in our town." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "That's the truth I live with. Everything else is just trying to balance the scales." "Do they ever balance?" "No, but I keep adding weight to the other side anyway." They sat in silence after that, watching Red Hollow settle into its first night of freedom in 4 years. Somewhere in the distance, someone was singing. Closer by, children were playing in the street, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Normal sounds from a town remembering what normal felt like. Jacob Buchanan appeared as the last light was fading, walking up the street with deliberate purpose. He found Ethan on the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "The Coffins," he said without preamble. "You were right about the number." "I usually am." "Jesse, Silas, and Caleb. All 3. Jacob shook his head in wonder. "How did you know?" "I didn't know. I calculated." Ethan set down his coffee cup. Jesse was fast but reckless. Would go down first. Silas was smart but soft, relied on others to do his violence. Would fold under pressure. Caleb was the survivor. Would be last standing. But he'd make mistakes when his brothers fell. That's a lot of assumption. That's a lot of experience. I've seen men like them before. They follow patterns. He looked at Jacob. "The coffins get used?" "Tomorrow. Town's burying them in the cemetery, though there's debate about whether they deserve marked graves or just holes in the ground. Everyone deserves a marker, even bad men. Helps remind people why they died." Jacob nodded slowly. "You'll be gone by then?" "Before sunrise." "Running from gratitude?" "Running toward the next place that needs help." Ethan stood, his body protesting the movement. "But tell me something, Jacob. When you build coffins for good people, people who died of old age or sickness or bad luck, do you feel sad?" "Every time." "And when you built those 3 for the Rourkes, knowing what they were for?" Jacob considered the question honestly. I felt useful, like my work mattered in a way it usually doesn't. That's the difference between building coffins and building justice. Both involve death, but only one builds something after. Ethan held out his hand. Thank you for your work, Jacob. It was good craftsmanship in service of a good cause. They shook hands, and Jacob left, walking back toward his workshop where 3 coffins waited to be filled and buried and forgotten. That night, Ethan packed his few belongings, checked his gun one more time, and tried to sleep. His ribs ached, his chest was one massive bruise, and his hands still smelled like gunpowder no matter how many times he'd washed them, but he'd done what he came to do. Red Hollow was free. The question was whether freedom was something they'd know how to use. He'd find out eventually. Word traveled on the frontier, stories moving from town to town carried by merchants and drifters and people with nothing better to talk about. In a few months, he'd hear whether Red Hollow had thrived or collapsed, whether they'd built something worth having or just waited for the next Rourke brothers to arrive. He hoped for thriving, expected something in between. Either way, it wasn't his problem anymore. Tomorrow, he'd ride east toward the next town where bad men did bad things and good people needed someone to show them that fighting back was possible. It wasn't much of a purpose, but it was more than he'd had when his wife was alive and he'd been too scared to protect her, and that would have to be enough. Outside his window, Red Hollow settled into sleep, the streets quiet but no longer afraid, the darkness still dark but no longer threatening. 3 coffins were ready. 3 brothers were dead, and one stranger was already disappearing into the past tense, becoming the story people would tell their children about the summer of 1882, when a man with a gun and a death wish had given them back their town. Whether they'd keep it was up to them. Ethan closed his eyes and tried not to dream of fire. The dreams came anyway, the way they always did. Not fire this time, but faces. Jesse Rourke looking surprised as the bullet hit him. Silas bleeding out in the alley, still calculating odds that no longer mattered. Caleb slumping forward in the stable, his empire collapsing with him. And behind them all, older faces from other towns, other fights, other men who died because Ethan had decided they needed to. He woke at 4 in the morning, the sky still dark, his chest aching from the bruised ribs and the weight of accumulated choices. The room was silent except for the sound of his own breathing and the distant call of a rooster that didn't understand timing. Ethan dressed in the darkness, moving quietly out of habit, even though there was no one to wake. He'd paid Sarah through the end of the week, left the extra money on the dresser with a note thanking her for the hospitality and the kindness. People like Sarah Mitchell made places like Red Hollow worth saving, even when the saving required blood. He checked his saddlebags one more time: ammunition, dried food, the small leather journal where he kept names and dates of the people he'd helped and the people he'd killed. The list of the latter was getting longer than the former, which bothered him in ways he didn't examine too closely. Some nights he told himself the math would balance eventually. Most nights he knew he was lying. The street outside was empty, the town still sleeping off the trauma and relief of yesterday. Ethan walked to the livery stable, where his bay gelding waited with the patience of an animal that had learned not to expect comfort, just forward motion. He was saddling the horse when he heard footsteps behind him. Marshal Dean Carter stood in the stable doorway, his arm in a sling, his badge catching the pre-dawn light. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 days, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something that looked like purpose. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" Carter asked. "Figured goodbyes just make it harder." "For who?" "Everyone." Ethan tightened the saddle cinch, checked it twice. "You should be resting that shoulder." "I should be doing a lot of things. Resting isn't one of them." Carter moved further into the stable, leaning against a support post. "The judge's letter went out last night. Express rider. Should reach him in 3 days." "Good." "Billy Preston died an hour ago. Doc said the infection was too far gone." Ethan paused in his preparations, felt the weight of that information settle onto the pile he was already carrying. "That makes 4. 4? 4 coffins needed. I ordered 3 because that's how many Rourkes there were. Didn't account for Billy." He resumed saddling his horse, his movements mechanical. "I'm usually right about the number. Not this time." "You can't blame yourself for—" "I don't blame myself, I just note it." Ethan's voice was flat. Billy Preston made choices. Drew his gun, took his chances. What happened after is on him, not me. Carter studied him, this stranger who'd become something like a friend in the span of a week. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, I'd never sleep at all instead of just sleeping badly. Ethan finished with the saddle, moved to check the bridle. How's the town taking it? The deaths? The fire? All of it? Like you'd expect. Some people are celebrating, throwing the Rourke's names around like curses they're finally allowed to say out loud. Others are scared, wondering what comes next, and a few— Carter paused, choosing his words carefully. A few are angry at you for making them face what they'd been avoiding. Let them be angry. Anger's more useful than fear. Is it? Angry people fight back, scared people just take it. Ethan looked at Carter directly. Which one are you going to be when the next problem comes? Because there's always a next problem. I'm going to be what I should have been 4 years ago. A lawman who actually enforces the law. Carter's hand moved to his badge, touched it like a talisman. You gave me that. Gave the town that. Whether we wanted it or not. I gave you the opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. That's a lot of weight to put on people. That's what freedom weighs. Ethan led his horse toward the stable entrance, Carter following. You spent 4 years under the Rourke's boot. Now you're out from under it. That means choices, responsibility, the burden of deciding what kind of town Red Hollow becomes. It's not comfortable, but it's better than the alternative. They stepped out into the street, where the first hints of dawn were turning the eastern sky from black to gray. The town was still sleeping, but smoke from early morning cooking fires was starting to drift up from a few chimneys, normal life resuming, or trying to. Where will you go? Carter asked. East first. Got to send money to my daughter, let her know I'm still breathing, then wherever the wind takes me. You ever think about settling down? Finding a place to stay instead of always leaving? Ethan swung up into the saddle, his ribs screaming in protest. Every day. And every day I remember that settling down means caring about something. And caring about something means it can be taken away. He gathered the reins. I already learned that lesson. Don't need to repeat it. That's not living, Ethan. That's just existing. Maybe. But existing is all I've got the stomach for these days. He looked down at Carter, saw the disappointment in the marshal's face, but didn't apologize for it. You take care of this town, Dean. Make sure what happened here meant something. I will. I promise. Don't promise me. Promise them. Ethan gestured to the sleeping town around them. They're the ones who have to live with whatever comes next. Before Carter could respond, another voice cut through the early morning quiet. You weren't going to say goodbye at all, were you? Lena Hartwell stood in the middle of the street, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill, her eyes red from crying or not sleeping or both. She looked small and fierce and tired, like someone who'd been carrying a weight for so long that putting it down felt wrong. Figured it was easier this way, Ethan said. Easier for who? She walked closer, stopped a few feet from his horse. You do something good for someone, you should at least let them thank you properly. I don't need thanks. Maybe not, but I need to give them. She pulled an envelope from her shawl, held it up. This is a contract, official freight service agreement. Your name on it as a partner in Hartwell Freight with a 40% share of profits. Lena, I can't. You can and you are. You gave me money to rebuild. This makes it legal, makes it a business arrangement instead of charity. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. And it means that wherever you go, whatever town you ride into next, you've got a stake in something, a reason to come back. Ethan looked at the envelope, at the woman holding it, at the hope in her eyes that he'd accept what she was offering. Part of him wanted to refuse, to keep moving unburdened, to maintain the distance that kept things simple. But another part, the part that remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting, reached down and took the envelope. I probably won't be back, he said quietly. Probably isn't never. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. And 40% of profits means we'll send you money. Quarterly reports, updates on how the town's doing. Whether you read them or not is up to you, but you'll get them. Why? Because you gave me back my future. The least I can do is make sure you know what that future looks like. She stepped closer, put her hand on his boot. And because I think somewhere under all that guilt and running, you're still a man who wants to believe good things can last. This is proof they can. Ethan tucked the envelope into his saddlebag, not trusting himself to speak. After a moment, he managed, Thank you. Thank you. She stepped back, wiping her eyes. Now get out of here before the whole town wakes up and tries to throw you a parade or make you mayor or something equally awful. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, he tipped his hat to her and Carter both turned his horse east and started riding. The sun was just breaking the horizon when Sarah Mitchell caught up with him at the edge of town. She was out of breath from running, her gray hair coming loose from its pins, but she had something in her hands she was determined to give him. Mr. Vale. Ethan. Wait. He stopped his horse, turned. Sarah? She hurried up, pressed a small package into his hands. It was wrapped in cloth, tied with string, warm to the touch. Food for the road. Bread, cheese, some dried apples. I know you've got supplies, but fresh is better than dried. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd blown through her life like a storm and left everything different. You paid me for a week's room. You were only here 5 days. The difference isn't enough to change my life, but it might keep you fed for a few more miles. Sarah, I've got money. I know, but this isn't about money. It's about... She paused, searching for words. It's about making sure you know that someone cares if you eat. Someone cares if you're safe. Someone cares, period. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, something he'd kept carefully sealed for 3 years. He took the package, held it like it was precious, because in that moment it was. Thank you, he said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. You're welcome. She patted his leg the way a mother would. And Ethan, what you said about your wife, about how you failed her? You're wrong. You failed her once. Everything you've done since, every town you've helped, every person you've saved, that's not running from her memory. That's honoring it. Sarah, let me finish. Her voice was gentle but insistent. Your wife died because bad men did bad things and you didn't know how to stop them. But now you do. And you've used that knowledge to save dozens, maybe hundreds of people in other towns. That's not cowardice, that's redemption, whether you want to call it that or not. Ethan couldn't speak. Didn't trust himself to try. Sarah stepped back, her piece said. Safe travels, Mr. Vale. Come back to Red Hollow if you ever get tired of wandering. We'll have coffee waiting. She walked away before he could respond, heading back toward her boarding house and the life that would continue after he was gone. Ethan sat on his horse at the edge of town, holding a package of food wrapped with care, feeling the weight of kindness that asked for nothing in return. Around him, Red Hollow was waking up properly now, doors opening, voices calling, the sounds of a town that had survived the night and was ready to face the day. He could stay. The thought crossed his mind the way it crossed his mind in every town after the fighting stopped. He could stay and help rebuild, could see the thing he'd started through to completion, could have coffee with Lena and make sure Carter stayed sober and watch Red Hollow become whatever it was going to become. But staying meant roots, and roots meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant the chance of losing something that mattered, and he'd already lost the thing that mattered most. So he did what he always did. He rode away. The road east was dusty and familiar, the kind of road he'd traveled 100 times before. His horse settled into an easy pace, conserving energy for the long miles ahead. Behind him, Red Hollow grew smaller, the smoke from breakfast fires the last thing he could see before the town disappeared behind a rise in the land. He thought about the people he was leaving behind. Carter, trying to be the lawman he used to be. Lena, building a business that would employ and sustain. Sarah, caring for strangers because that's who she was. Marcus and Clara Shaw, learning to live with the choice they'd made. Jacob Buchanan, building coffins that told stories. All of them carrying on, making do, figuring out what freedom looked like when you'd spent years without it. He thought about the people he'd killed. Jesse, fast but foolish. Silas, smart but soft. Caleb, strong but brittle. Billy Preston, young and stupid and now just dead. 4 men who'd made choices that led them to a street in Red Hollow on a Friday afternoon when a stranger with a gun decided their time was up. He thought about his wife burning to death because he'd been too scared to fight the men who'd demanded his shop. About his daughter in Philadelphia, growing up without a mother and with a father who sent money but never stayed. About all the choices that had led him from furniture maker to killer, from husband to wanderer, from happy to just functional. And he thought about the question Sarah had raised. whether what he was doing was running from his failure or honoring his wife's memory. He didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was both, or neither, or something in between that didn't have a name. What he did know was this. Somewhere out there was another town like Red Hollow. Another place where bad men had convinced good people that resistance was futile, that bending was the same as surviving, that fear was just the price of peace. Another place that needed someone to show them that fighting back was possible, and he'd find that place, the way he'd found Red Hollow and the 3 towns before it. He'd ride in quiet and leave loud, and in between he'd do what he was good at, violence in service of people who'd forgotten how to be violent on their own behalf. It wasn't a noble purpose. It wasn't even a particularly good one. It was just the purpose he had, and that would have to be enough. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning from cool to warm to hot. Ethan rode through it, his ribs aching, his hands steady on the reins, his mind already moving forward to whatever came next. He'd send money to his daughter from the next town. He'd write her a letter telling her he was fine, that he was working, that he thought about her every day. He wouldn't tell her about Red Hollow or the Rourke brothers or the 4 men who'd died. She didn't need to know that part. She just needed to know he was still alive and still her father, even if he wasn't much of one. Around noon, he stopped to water his horse at a stream that ran clear and cold. While the animal drank, Ethan opened Sarah's package and found fresh bread, sharp cheese, and dried apples like she'd promised. But there was also something else, a note, written in careful script. Mr. Vale, your wife would want you to live, not just exist. Think about that. SM. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his journal, next to the names of people he'd helped and killed. The list was getting long enough that he'd need a new journal soon. Maybe in the next town he'd buy one, start fresh with blank pages that didn't have quite so much blood written on them. He ate his lunch by the stream, listening to the water and the wind and the horse-cropping grass. It was peaceful in a way that made him uncomfortable. Peaceful meant time to think, and thinking led to places he tried not to go. So he finished eating, mounted up, and kept riding. The afternoon stretched long and hot, the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer and the distance lie. Ethan passed a freight wagon heading west, the driver nodding in greeting. Past a family in a covered wagon, heading somewhere they thought would be better than where they'd been. Past a pair of cowboys driving cattle, too focused on their work to pay him attention. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a few miles back there was a town where extraordinary things had happened. That's how it always went. The world was big, and individual stories got swallowed by the enormity of it. Red Hollow would remember, but beyond Red Hollow, who would care? Maybe that was the point. Maybe the small victories, one town freed, one family saved, one person given back their hope. Maybe those were enough even if they didn't change the whole world. Maybe you couldn't change the whole world. Maybe you could only change the small piece of it right in front of you, and trust that enough people doing that would add up to something. Or maybe that was just what he told himself to justify the killing. He didn't know. Wasn't sure anyone did. By evening, he'd put 20 miles between himself and Red Hollow. He made camp off the road, in a stand of cottonwoods near another stream. The horse was unsaddled and hobbled, content to graze. A small fire, just enough for coffee, not enough to draw attention. His bedroll spread under stars that were just starting to appear in the darkening sky. Ethan sat by the fire, drinking coffee that was too hot and too strong, watching the flames dance and thinking about the past week, about the people he'd met and the choices he'd made and the consequences that would ripple out from Friday afternoon for years to come. In his saddlebag, he had Lena's contract making him a partner in something. He had Sarah's note telling him to live instead of exist. He had Carter's respect, earned through blood and brass. He had the memory of a town that had been broken and might, just might, be on its way to healing. It wasn't much to show for a week's work, wasn't much to show for 3 years of wandering. But it was something. And maybe Sarah was right. Maybe honoring his wife's memory didn't mean punishing himself forever. Maybe it meant using what he'd learned from failing her to help other people succeed. Maybe redemption wasn't a destination you reached, but a direction you traveled, one town at a time, one fight at a time, one small victory at a time. Or maybe he was just tired and injured and thinking thoughts that would seem foolish in the morning. He finished his coffee, banked the fire, and lay down in his bedroll. The stars overhead were bright and indifferent. The same stars that had watched his wife die and watched him kill 4 men and would watch whatever came next with the same cosmic disinterest. Ethan closed his eyes and waited for sleep, knowing the dreams would come but hoping they'd be kind. They weren't. But when he woke at dawn, he was still breathing, still functional, still capable of saddling his horse and continuing east toward whatever town needed help next. And that, he supposed, was what living looked like when you'd forgotten how to do anything else. The road continued the way roads do. Ethan followed it, the way he'd been following roads for 3 years. Somewhere ahead was the next Red Hollow, the next set of people who'd bent themselves around violence and forgotten how to stand straight. He'd find them. He always did. And when he found them, he'd do what he did best. He'd show them that fighting back was possible, that bullies were mortal, that freedom had a price, but slavery cost more. Then he'd leave, because staying hurt worse than going, and he'd already learned exactly how much hurt he could carry. It wasn't a perfect life. Wasn't even a particularly good one. But it was his, and it meant something to people who needed it to mean something, and for now that was enough to keep him riding toward the next sunrise. Behind him, Red Hollow was waking up to its first full day without the Rourkes. People were opening shops without checking to see who was watching. Children were playing in streets without looking over their shoulders. Lena Hartwell was already at her freight office, planning expansions she'd been too afraid to dream about for years. Marshall Carter was in his office, sober and writing letters to people who'd been hurt by the Rourkes, preparing testimonies for when the judge arrived. Sarah Mitchell was baking bread and humming, feeling lighter than she'd felt in years. Marcus Shaw was looking for honest work, his wife's hand in his, both of them building toward a future that didn't involve compromises. Jacob Buchanan was building coffins for people who'd die of old age instead of violence. And 3 pine boxes sat fresh-filled in the cemetery, markers already carved with names that would be remembered as warnings instead of victors. Red Hollow was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. And far to the east, a man with a gun and a death wish and a purpose he couldn't quite name was riding toward the next broken place, carrying coffee from the last town and hope he didn't quite believe in but offered anyway. Because someone had to. Because his wife had died and he'd learned too late how to fight. Because every town he helped was a small weight lifted from the scale he'd never balance. Because existing was all he had. But maybe Sarah was right, and existing could become living if he worked at it long enough. Or maybe not. Either way, the road continued, and Ethan Vale continued with it. Somewhere ahead, another town was waiting to learn what Red Hollow had learned, that bullies were mortal, that fear was optional, that freedom was possible if someone was willing to pay the price. He'd find that town. He'd pay that price, and then he'd ride away, leaving behind people who remembered that once, for a brief moment, someone had cared enough to fight for them when they'd forgotten how to fight for themselves. It wasn't redemption, but it was close enough to keep him breathing, and for now, that would have to be enough. The sun rose higher, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Ethan rode into it, his shadow stretching long behind him, his future uncertain ahead, his present just the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on hard-packed dirt. 3 coffins in Red Hollow. Countless more in towns whose names he'd eventually forget. One man trying to outrun a failure that followed him everywhere. That was the story. Not heroic, not clean, not the way the tales usually ended, but real and true, and his. And in a world where bad men did bad things and good people looked away, real and true was sometimes all you could hope for. Ethan Vale rode east toward the next Red Hollow, carrying the weight of what he'd done and the hope of what he might do next. The road had no end, but it had purpose. And purpose, however flawed, was enough to keep moving forward. One town at a time, one fight at a time, one small redemption at a time, until the road finally ended, or he did, whichever came first.